Good day, this is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Kalamata, Greece on September 10th, 2025. Yesterday, Israel's genocidal military launched a dozen or so airstrikes into the heart of Doha, the capital of Qatar. The targets of this attack were Hamas political leaders and negotiators who had gathered to consider the latest so-called peace proposal from the Trump regime. Here's some footage of the attack, which was captured by CCTV cameras. Now, if that looked to you like a residential area, that's because that's precisely what it was. It was a residential area. According to Hamas, Israel failed to assassinate any members of the negotiating delegation, but a lower-level Hamas official and family and friends of the negotiators were martyred. The victims of this murderous assault were Jihad Labad, director of the office of Dr. Khalil al-Haya, Hamam al-Haya, son of Dr. Khalil al-Haya, Abdullah Abdul Wahid, a companion, Mumin Hasuna, a companion, and Ahmed al-Mamluk, also a companion. The Israelis also managed to kill warrant officer Badr Saad Muhammad al-Humaidi from the Qatari Internal Security Service. In a statement, Hamas said the following: "The targeting of the negotiating delegation at a moment when it is discussing the latest proposal of U.S. President Donald Trump confirms beyond any doubt that Netanyahu and his government do not want to reach an agreement and that they are deliberately seeking to thwart all opportunities and foil international endeavors, heedless of the lives of their prisoners held by the resistance, the sovereignty of nations, or the security and stability of the region. We hold the U.S. administration jointly responsible with the occupation for this crime due to its continuous support for the aggression and the occupation's crimes against our people. The crime has proven that the Zionist occupation is an imminent danger to the region and the world, and that Netanyahu is trying to erase our national cause and the rights of our people, and to push them toward forced displacement, continuing his criminal plans of genocide, ethnic cleansing, starvation, and displacement. The cowardly assassination attempt will not change our clear positions and demands, which are the immediate cessation of the aggression against our people, the complete withdrawal of the occupation army from the Gaza Strip, a genuine prisoner exchange, and relief and reconstruction for our people." Now, a dozen Israeli airstrikes on a residential district in the heart of Qatar's capital, which killed a Qatari security official, constitute, in my view, an act of war by Israel against Qatar. So how did the Qatari regime respond to this act of war? Well, it began by declaring as follows: "The state of Qatar strongly condemns the cowardly Israeli attack that targeted residential buildings housing several members of the political bureau of Hamas in the Qatari capital, Doha. This criminal assault constitutes a blatant violation of all international laws and norms and poses a serious threat to the security and safety of Qataris and residents in Qatar. The ministry affirms that the security forces, civil defense, and relevant authorities immediately began addressing the incident and taking necessary measures to contain its repercussions and ensure the safety of the residents and surrounding areas. While the state of Qatar strongly condemns this assault, it confirms that it will not tolerate this reckless Israeli behavior and the ongoing disruption of regional security, nor any act that targets its security and sovereignty. Investigations are underway at the highest level, and further details will be announced as soon as they are available." The Times of Israel, meanwhile, reports that, according to a diplomatic source familiar with the matter, Qatar informed the Trump administration earlier today that it is temporarily suspending its mediation efforts to secure a ceasefire and hostage deal between Hamas and Israel. That, I imagine, is exactly what the Netanyahu regime wants: an end, or at least a prolonged suspension, of the negotiations with Hamas, which will buy it yet more time to continue the ongoing genocide. Now, before I offer you my views about what is likely to have happened here, let's dispense with the obvious. It is obvious, and has been obvious for a long time, that Israel's genocidal regime has zero interest in negotiating a durable peace deal with Hamas. The attack yesterday is just one more piece of evidence in a veritable mountain of evidence that the genocidal Israeli regime's overarching goal is to wipe out the Palestinian people. Clearly, a durable peace deal between Israel and Hamas is antithetical to that objective. It's also obvious, in my opinion, that Israel would never have launched this attack without the prior approval and quite possibly the active assistance of the United States. Qatar hosts the Al Udeid military base, one of the U.S. military's largest and most important bases in West Asia. It houses the United States Air Force, the United Kingdom's Royal Air Force, and is host to a forward headquarters of U.S. Central Command and the headquarters of the U.S. Air Force Central Command. Given the importance of this small country to U.S. military operations in West Asia, which are of the highest strategic importance to the American government, it's simply implausible in the extreme that Israel, which is existentially dependent on the military, economic, and political support of the U.S. government, would commit this act of war against Qatar without a green light from the Trump administration. In fact, with thousands of military personnel in Qatar, just a few dozen kilometers away from Doha, the U.S. was well positioned to provide vital intelligence to Israel to help it to carry out this attack. And it's entirely plausible that that's exactly what the U.S. did. Now, you don't have to take my word for it that the Trump regime approved in advance this impending attack. Yesterday, the Jerusalem Post reported that, according to unnamed Israeli officials, U.S. officials knew about the attack on Hamas in advance and gave the green light for the operation. A U.S. official denied that that was true to the Jerusalem Post, claiming that, in fact, no advance warning was given, nor was any approval obtained. So there's a conflict between the Israeli sources of the Jerusalem Post and the U.S. official who responded to what the Israeli sources claimed. Netanyahu's office, for what it's worth, tried to bolster the Trump regime's denial of a green light. It issued a statement that today's action against the top terrorist chieftains of Hamas was a wholly independent Israeli operation. Israel initiated it, Israel conducted it, and Israel takes full responsibility for it. Of course, the pathological liars in the Trump regime have a strong incentive to deny that they knew in advance and approved of the attack, because admitting to this would almost certainly inflame anti-American sentiments in the region, which are already sky high. And Netanyahu has a strong incentive to lie in support of Donald Trump, because Israel is existentially dependent on U.S. support, and embarrassing its most important protector is not likely to enhance the agenda of the Netanyahu regime. At the end of the day, both of these denials, those of the U.S. official who spoke to the Jerusalem Post and that of the Prime Minister of Israel's office, are worthless. It's simply implausible that Israel would engage in such aggressive and provocative behavior against a key U.S. vassal in the region without U.S. approval, and both the Trump regime and the Netanyahu regime have plenty of incentive to lie about this. Amidst all this confusion, the White House issued a statement that muddied the waters even more. Yesterday, White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt said in a prepared statement that the U.S. military notified the Trump administration on Tuesday morning, just hours before the attack, that Israel was attacking Hamas. But when and how did the U.S. military learn of this impending attack? And when Trump learned of it, did he try to stop it? Now, as far as I know, the White House has not answered either of these questions. Moreover, Leavitt gave mixed signals as to Trump's views about this act of war on Qatar. On the one hand, she said that Qatar is working with the U.S. to broker peace in the Middle East, and the attack, quote, does not advance Israel or America's goals, close quote. On the other hand, she also said, quote, however, eliminating Hamas, who have profited off the misery of those living in Gaza, is a worthy goal, close quote. In fact, Ms. Leavitt, no one has profited more from the misery of those living in Gaza than Western and Israeli military contractors. But I digress. This brings me to the subject that I want to focus upon most today, Rather than talk about the obvious, I want to take a closer look at a more complicated question. And that question is, what did the Qatari regime know in advance about this attack? The Qatari regime has denied that the US warned it of the attack before it began. Qatar admits that it did receive a notification, that's what it called it, of the attack from the US, but it says that the notification was delivered after the attack began. And you can see this here in a report by Agence France Presse, where the warning is characterized by the Qatari official as a notification. And the Qatari official says that the call was received from an American official, an unnamed American official, as explosions sounded from the Israeli attack in Doha. Frankly, none of that makes any sense. Why would a U.S. official call the Qataris as the attack is occurring? And let's bear in mind that this attack lasted no more than a couple of minutes. It might have actually lasted less than a minute, as you saw the strikes, the dozen or so strikes on the residential area in the heart of the capital came in quick succession. So notifying the Qataris that Israel is attacking them at the very moment that they're being attacked in an aggression that lasted no more than a few minutes, this would have had absolutely no value whatsoever to the Qataris. By that point, it would have been too late for them to do anything. And so all the Americans would have accomplished by making that phone call was that they would have signaled to Qatar that they knew in advance that the attack was coming. So frankly, this claim that the call came from the U.S. official to the Qataris as the explosions were happening just doesn't really hold any water. Now, I have no inside information about what actually happened here, and I want to be clear about that. But when we try to interpret the actions of pathological liars and psychopathic warmongers, and to do so on the basis of imperfect information, we're obliged to do the best that we can with that limited and conflicting evidence. In this challenging informational environment, all we can do is identify the most plausible scenarios. In my view, the most plausible scenario is that the Qatari regime knew in advance that the attack would occur and did nothing to stop it. However, the fact that Israel managed to kill none of the primary targets suggests to me that someone in Qatar who had knowledge of the impending attack tipped off the Hamas officials at the last second, thus sparing their lives. Now, why do I say that the Qataris were likely to have known about this in advance? Well, my reasoning is simply this. The Qatari regime is a very important U.S. vassal in the region, and the U.S. would want to ensure that its vassal is prepared in advance for any political instability that might erupt as a result of this act of war by Israel on Qatar. The regime would need to get its ducks in a row by preparing messaging for public consumption and putting its repressive security services on high alert for possible unrest amongst the population. The last thing that the U.S. wants is an uprising in Qatar that might bring to power a government that is hostile to U.S. domination of the region. At this point, let me pause and deal with the oft-repeated claim that Qatar is a mediator between Hamas and Israel. Given the massive presence of the U.S. military in Qatar, it's clear that the Qatari regime is highly dependent upon and vulnerable to the dictates of U.S. foreign policy. Moreover, what have Qatar's extensive mediation efforts yield for the Palestinian people? What those supposed mediation efforts have produced is more dispossession, more apartheid, and now an almost 2-year-long genocide. Qatar's so-called mediation has simply fostered an illusion that Israel and the United States are serious about bringing their genocidal rampage to an end. By any rational measure, Qatar's mediation has been an abysmal failure. Last year, I went to Qatar in March to investigate the presence of the U.S. military in the country. While I was there, I attended a massive weapons exhibition in Doha. The exhibition is known as Dimdex. What I discovered as I roamed the cavernous floor of the convention center where the exhibition was being held is that virtually all the Western weapons manufacturers that have been enabling and profiting from Israel's genocide were warmly welcomed to the country by the Qatari regime. Here's a video excerpt from my report published in March of last year, 6 months after the genocide in Palestine began.
Now we're entering into the belly of the beast, my friends. Here we go. Raytheon. Profiting as I speak from a genocide in Gaza. Then something called General Atomics Aeronautical. I have to show you this. This is really something. This looks to me like the control panel for drones, including killer drones. And just looking at this thing, you can imagine how easy it is to persuade people to kill with these beasts, because this has the look and feel of a video game experience.
Any one of them.
And it's probably the highest caliber video game experience you're likely to have if you're into that sort of a thing, which I'm not. No disrespect intended to idiot gamers. And there you can see a drone, and then they're showing this this promotional video up there. And here we go, General Dynamic Land Systems. Another company which I'm pretty sure is also profiting from a brazen, sadistic genocide as I speak. So here's an example of a truly gigantic armored personnel carrier. Look at the size of this thing. And that also appears to have some air defense systems atop. You can see right there on top of the turret. That looks like surface-to-air missiles to me, but again, I could be wrong about that. Lockheed Martin, a diabolical military corporation that sucks up vast amounts of American public money on trumped-up prices and constantly overrun budgets. Look at these things. How do these people sleep at night?
Now, for those of you who don't know, Lockheed Martin is the manufacturer of the F-35, which is the principal aircraft the Israelis have used to pummel and destroy, utterly demolish virtually the entirety of Gaza. And let me tell you, folks, this was not simply some, affair, this Dimdex conference that I attended last year involving private enterprise inside Qatar in the West. This was an event that was presided over by high officials of the Qatari government and military. So it had the blessing of the state. Here you had, at the very moment, 6 months into a genocide when Israel was mass murdering tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians, the so-called mediator, the Qatari regime, warmly embracing the very Western corporations that were enabling and profiting enormously from the mass slaughter of Palestinians. Mediators cannot be effective in their role without demonstrating scrupulous neutrality between the parties to the dispute. I know something about mediation because in my decades of legal practice, I attended dozens of them involving high financial stakes and complex issues. And I can assure you that neither I nor my clients would ever have accepted a mediator in any of these dispute resolution processes who had not convinced us of their neutrality. And our opponents, I'm sure, in these negotiations felt precisely the same way about neutrality. Neutrality is the sine qua non of effective mediation. The Qatari regime, however, allowed Western weapons makers to market their death machines on Qatari soil at the very moment when those weapons were being used to mass murder Palestinians. The Qatari regime also houses a huge military base of the United States military, which is the primary enabler of Israel's genocide. Does that sound like neutrality to you? So what is likely to have happened here behind the scenes? In my view, shortly before the attack, there was probably a conversation between Trump and the Emir of Qatar, Tamim bin Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani. The conversation probably went something like this. Hello, my friend, Emir. And this would be, of course, the Donald speaking. The Israelis have decided that they want to take out the current political leadership of Hamas, who happen to be in your capital at this very moment. And I've given them the green light to go ahead with this operation. I wanted you to have a heads up because I imagine you're going to have to make preparations for dealing with the aftermath. And look, I understand if you're going to have to say some nasty things about the Israelis in order to calm the population down and convince people in the region that you're serious about defending the sovereignty of Qatar. But whatever you do, don't say anything negative about me. At the end of the day, after you finish blowing off steam, people will eventually forget and we'll go back to business as usual. Thanks very much. Now, I would imagine that if that conversation did in fact occur, that Trump didn't ask the emir for permission. He simply told the emir that this is how it was going to be, because that's what vassals do. They take orders from the overlord, no questions asked. Now, again, I don't know for a fact that a conversation like this happened. I have no inside information, and I might well be wrong about this. But based on the limited and conflicting evidence available, I think the most plausible hypothesis is that this is more or less how things went down. After the attack, the Qatari Ministry of Foreign Affairs held a press conference. Let's take a look at what happened.
The Israeli attack that took place today in the state of Qatar. We can only call it as a state terrorism that is being exerted by someone like Netanyahu, given his attempts and his policies as he tries to threaten the regional security. This is only a clear message to the whole region. And this message says that there is one player, and there's also a disrespect to all the policies and also a violation to the sovereignty of all the countries and the states. Netanyahu said himself that he will reshape the Middle East. Does he mean that he's also going to reshape the Gulf region? I think that we have reached a decisive moment. There should be a retaliation from the whole region in the face of those barbaric actions that only reflects one thing. It reflects the barbarism of this person that is leading the region to, unfortunately, to a point where we cannot address any situation and we cannot repair anything and we cannot work within the frameworks of international laws. He just violates all those international laws. This attack, the targeting was beyond and violating not only international laws but only all morals. We are talking about a mediator state that is hosting formal negotiations in a formal and official mediation and hosting with a delegation from a state that is sending missiles and rockets against another group of a delegation from another state that they're supposed to negotiate with. How can this be morally accepted?
So you just heard the Qatari representative characterize the actions of the Netanyahu regime as state terrorism, which I think is an entirely fair characterization, and characterize this particular aggression as having constituted some kind of a turning point, and that it violated all norms and morals and international law. The question that I would have had I been afforded the opportunity to attend that press conference for this particular representative of the Qatari regime is, do you believe that what happened yesterday is as bad or worse than what has been happening to the Palestinian people, not only for the last 2 years, but in fact for decades? As egregious as this violation of Qatari sovereignty may have been, and as barbaric as this attack on a residential neighborhood using powerful munitions, as you saw, was, the fact of the matter is that what the Israelis have been doing to the Palestinians for a long time, and particularly since October 2023, is infinitely worse than what Qatar suffered yesterday. And at any point in time, up until this attack on the sovereign territory of Qatar, or I should say supposedly sovereign territory of Qatar, did the Qatari regime call upon the entire region to retaliate against Israel? Did it say that its behavior had crossed all red lines, violated every norm of morality and international law known to humanity, and that enough was enough, and we were now going to act decisively to retaliate collectively against Israel. I don't recall hearing, sure there was criticism, but I don't recall hearing language of that nature. Why all of a sudden are we to believe that the Qataris are serious about putting a stop to Israeli aggression when they've sat by and done effectively nothing, along with their fellow Arab vassals in West Asia, during every imaginable horror being inflicted upon the Palestinian people? I think it would be rather naive and frankly downright irrational for people to expect, based on what we've seen thus far, that Qatar actually is going to retaliate, or that neighboring autocracies are going to act in defense of Qatari sovereignty, when they've done nothing really to enable or defend the Palestinian people, and in fact have done a lot to undermine the interests of the Palestinian people, not to mention that they've also stood by idly as Israel has completely violated in every imaginable way the sovereignty of other predominantly Arab states, including Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen. In fact, if anything, the autocrats, the Washington-backed autocrats of the region, supported Israel's efforts to destabilize and destroy resistance groups in those particular countries. So there really is no rational basis to believe that this is going to change anything in terms of the behavior of the Qatari regime and its fellow US-backed regimes in the region toward Israel. I would very much like to be wrong about this, but I think as a matter of logic and evidence, our expectation should be that the behavior of these regimes will not change. Now, on that note, the Saudi regime predictably issued a strongly worded denunciation of Israel's aggression. The Saudi Foreign Ministry stated as follows in a statement posted on X. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia condemns and denounces in the strongest possible terms the brutal Israeli aggression and the blatant violation of the sovereignty of the state of Qatar. The Kingdom affirms its full solidarity and support for Qatar, placing all its capabilities at its disposal to assist in any measures it may take, while warning of the grave consequences of the Israeli occupation's persistent criminal assaults and its blatant violations of the principles of international law and all international norms, close quote. Well, I think we are expected to infer from this statement that because the Saudi regime made reference to the employment of all its capabilities, that we're expected to infer that Saudi Arabia is finally willing to deploy its military capabilities to rein in America's rabid attack dog in the region, Israel. Again, I ask this question, and by the way, those military capabilities should be formidable. Whether they are or not is another matter. As we've seen, Yemen was able to beat back the Saudi military over years of Saudi brutality. But they should be formidable because Saudi Arabia has one of the largest military budgets in the world, and has had one of the largest military budgets in the world for quite some time, and is constantly expending massive sums of money on what are supposed to be the world's most sophisticated U.S.-made weapons. So this, you would think, is a quite potentially portentous threat coming from the Saudi regime. But again, I ask the question, where have they been during the past 2 years of genocide? Are the Saudis arguing that what happened to Qatar yesterday is anywhere near as bad as what the Israelis have been doing to the Palestinians for almost 2 years, or what they did to South Lebanon, what they did to Yemen and continue to do to Yemen and continue to do to South Lebanon, what they're doing to Syria, what they attempted to do in a catastrophically unsuccessful manner to the Islamic Republic of Iran? Are we supposed to believe that what Qatar suffered yesterday is anywhere near as bad as any of that? I mean, obviously, that's not the case. And so the question arises, why should we take seriously this language now? I predict, and again, I would love to be entirely wrong about this, that the Saudis are not going to intervene militarily to protect the Palestinians or to stop Israeli aggression against states that are nominally sovereign in the region. And that we will soon find ourselves in a business as usual scenario after all the brouhaha has faded away and the Western corporate press stops paying attention to Israel's latest insane aggression. What is more uncertain and, to my mind, much more interesting is the reaction of ordinary citizens living in the countries where these traitorous Washington-backed tyrants hold power in the Arab world. Will the Arab masses continue to tolerate the humiliating betrayals of the autocrats who oppress them? Or will they finally remove those autocrats from power and achieve real independence and freedom for themselves and their fellow Arabs? I have no illusions about the dangers to ordinary citizens in the Arab world of opposing these sadistic regimes, but what alternative is there? Would they rather be slaves of Washington for the rest of their lives? That's the real question, and I don't purport to have an answer to that question. As I've said many times, I think there is a point at which the peoples of the region will explode in rebellion, and we just might have reached that point, although it's far too early to say with any confidence whether that's the case. Now, before I move on to other news related to the Palestinian struggle for liberation, I want to comment on the EU's reaction to Israel's latest hyper-aggression in Qatar. In the aftermath of Israel's attack, the EU put out the following statement, and this is from The Guardian. According to The Guardian, Israel's airstrike against Hamas leaders in Doha was described by the EU officials as a breach of international law and of Qatar's territorial integrity. And the EU warned against risks of a further escalation of violence in the region. The statement said, "We express full solidarity with the authorities and the people of Qatar, a strategic partner of the EU." This is coming from Kaja Kallas, the EU foreign policy chief, who frankly has done everything imaginable to shield Israel from any form of accountability for its Nazi-like behavior. And then Kallas went on and said, "Any escalation of the war in Gaza must be avoided. It is in no one's interest. We will continue to support all efforts towards a ceasefire in Gaza." Not likely, Ms. Kallas. In any case, as you can see here, the EU is characterizing what Israel did to Qatar yesterday as a breach of international law and a violation of the territorial integrity of the country. Both of those statements are unquestionably true. Now, it's quite interesting to compare this statement to the statement put out by the EU when Israel murdered, I should say, the leader of Hamas, the political leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, in Tehran some months ago. This was the statement they put out at that time. This would be October 2024. Israel's retaliatory attack against Iran, as confirmed by the IDF, occurred amid severe and growing regional tensions. The dangerous cycle of attacks and retaliations risks causing a further expansion of the regional conflict. While acknowledging Israel's right to self-defense, the EU calls on all parties to exercise utmost restraint to avoid an uncontrollable escalation, which is in no one's interest. The EU remains fully committed to lowering tensions and contributing to de-escalation. To this end, remains in close contact with all relevant actors. Well, here you can see that there is no acknowledgement that the Israelis violated international law or the territorial integrity of the Islamic Republic when they struck in the heart of Tehran, the capital of the country, and killed a political leader of Hamas, amongst others. And in fact, the EU, at least implicitly, was justifying the Israeli attack on Tehran by referring to it as retaliatory. Now, I'm befuddled by their use of the word retaliatory. Against whom were they retaliating, according to the EU? Were they retaliating against Hamas by killing Ismail Haniyeh while he was in Tehran. Well, if that was the logic of the EU at that time, that this was not a breach of international law or the territorial integrity of Iran because this was some kind of a retaliation against the leadership of Hamas, why doesn't that logic apply to Qatar? Why couldn't you characterize this, and I believe the Israelis have tried to do just that, as a retaliation against Hamas? Now, if on the other hand, the EU intended to suggest when it put out that statement last year about the attack in Tehran, that the retaliation was against Iran, not against Hamas, well, that's simply standing reality on its head. The cycle of attack and counterattack between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the genocidal Israeli entity began when Israel attacked the Iranian embassy in Damascus and killed senior military figures from Iran, which was unquestionably and in numerous respects a blatant violation of international law and effectively an act of war against the Islamic Republic. So the party that was retaliating in this context was not Israel, it was Iran. And when Israel struck in the heart of Tehran during the period when the country was inaugurating its new president and killed a number of people, including Ismail Haniyeh, it was in fact providing to the Iranians a justification for retaliating against Israel. So here again, we see just a quite obvious and incoherent manifestation of the EU's double standards. And again, I think despite its use of the phrase breach of international law and breach of the territorial integrity of Qatar, you can expect that the EU political elite will do precisely nothing to hold Israel accountable for this latest crime. In other news related to Israel's genocide in Palestine, Israel's military announced yesterday the death of 4 Israeli terrorists in the Gaza Strip. The slain troops were identified as a lieutenant, a staff sergeant, a sergeant, and another sergeant. And their deaths were announced at the same time as Netanyahu was warning Gaza City residents to get out as the Israeli terrorist forces pushed into the city. According to preliminary investigations, 3 Hamas fighters attacked a military camp in the Kfar Jabalia area around 6 a.m. yesterday. They approached a tank and threw an explosive device onto or into it, killing all 4 of the Israeli terrorists inside. Now, the Western media don't like to talk about this, but the courage that must be required for such assaults is impressive indeed. Approaching a tank on foot for the purpose of throwing an explosive device into it is, as you can imagine, an extremely dangerous maneuver. And I have no hesitation in saying that based on all that we have seen, the Palestinian fighters in Gaza, they have consistently shown vastly more courage than the cowardly baby killers of Israel's military. And by the way, the Israeli military also suffered a casualty of a non-combat nature yesterday. Israeli Occupation Army Radio announced yesterday morning that a reserve soldier was found dead in his home in the city of Rehovot just hours before his wedding. The 31-year-old soldier was found dead in his apartment with gunshot wounds. An investigation into the circumstances of the incident is underway. There is no suspicion of foul play, but rather of suicide. Finally, the Israeli military just lifted a censorship order covering a video of an Iranian missile attack committed 3 months ago during the so-called 12-day war between the genocidal Israeli entity and the Islamic Republic of Iran. And here is what that video shows.
In this footage, an Iranian missile strikes Haifa's Majdal Hamfarsh district, home to key Israeli government offices. This marks the confirmed Iranian missile footage in 2 months. The missile penetrates Israel's Iron Dome defense system, exposing its limitations. While Iron Dome claims over 90% success against short-range rockets, it remains vulnerable to longer-range and high-power missiles.
According to the Times of Israel, this video shows an Iranian ballistic missile impact near a building housing government officials in the northern city of Haifa. In the attack on June 20th, during the war between Iran and Israel, one of Iran's missiles hit next to Sail Tower, a 29-story skyscraper in downtown Haifa. Notably, the building has been abandoned since the attack, with the government offices moving to other locations. So that can only mean that the damage was quite severe if it's been abandoned, as the Times of Israel put it. And some 3 to 4 months later, the people who were formerly working there are working out of another location. So the question, of course, that this raises is, how many more videos like this one is Israel's genocidal military hiding from the public? And just how severe was the damage that Iran caused to the genocidal entity? I suspect that in the months ahead, we will find out, at least to some degree, the answers to those questions. In any case, I'm signing off for now. We'll continue to follow the story of how the Qatari regime and its Arab allies in the region will react, if at all, to Israel's latest aggression. This is Dimitri Lascaris signing off from Kalamata, Greece on September 10th, 2025.